Hi witches! So today we are talking about a topic that is really closely linked to the upcoming holiday of Samhain. And that is the topic of ancestor work, if you couldn't guess by the title already. Ancestor work is very interesting and something that I haven't really delved into, so I wanted to kind of go through my ancestry with you guys today. I actually did like a DNA test through ancestry.com. I don't know, I feel like that's probably not great information to have in a data bank, or there's some like weird conspiracy about it, but I don't care. I have my my ancestry stuff, and I am a mutt for sure. So I was just gonna kind of go through it and talk about all of that. I have my computer here, so I wanted just to talk about this is kind of an overview of ancestor work, and then later in the month we're gonna have a video about how to venerate your ancestors and how to work with your ancestors a little bit more. So this is kind of just an overview. So ancestor work is basically working with the spirits of people in your family who have passed on. They don't necessarily have to be blood related to you, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later today, because I did have somebody ask me that question in DMs at one point. But basically, ancestor work is very accessible, I think, to a lot of witches, whereas deity work may not be as accessible. There's a lot more research that is, there's a lot of things. So yeah, I'm just gonna jump in and share my ancestry and my whole thing, just so you can kind of learn a little bit more about me, and then we're gonna talk about how you can kind of start this path, okay? So for me, I don't know if you guys know this, my mother is Jewish and my father is from Puerto Rico. So when I got my ancestry stuff, I actually was not super shocked. I was a little bit shocked, but not really. So my top DNA group is 23% European Jewish. So hello. Which is cool, and that comes from my mom's side, obviously, and it's nice to know that, because I'm really, really close to my mom, it's nice to know that most of my DNA comes from her, though if you looked at the two of us, you could totally just tell that just by looking at us. When I got this little white streak in my hair, I saw a picture of myself, and I was like, oh shit, I look just like my mom, because she has silver hair, naturally silver hair. It's very cool. Following that, I have 19% Spain, or Spanish DNA, I guess, which makes sense. Colonizers who came over to colonize Puerto Rico were from Spain, which is why they speak Spanish, and now they're being colonized by America, but whatever. So yeah, I know I look like this, but I'm actually it's because I'm from the European Spanish thing. I feel like people forget Spain. When they think of Hispanic people, right, they think of people who are from Central or South America, but it's no, there are Spanish speaking people in Europe too, and that's why I look like this. Also, my mom is also very alabaster like I am, so not surprised. Following that, and this is another reason I look like this, I am 16% Scottish, so that's pretty cool. And then after that, it goes down by a lot in percentage. I am 8% Portuguese, which again makes sense coming from the Spain, Portugal area, makes sense. Then England and Northwestern Europe is also 8%. 6% Germanic Europe, 5% France. I have 4% from Wales, which is interesting. So looking at those, I know they're smaller percentages, but it's kind of cool. I can kind of trace a little bit of my roots back to kind of that Celtic area, especially England and Northwestern Europe, but specifically Scotland as well. So I actually plan on learning a little bit more about Scotland and Spain and the history of Spain, as well as the history of the Jewish people. Considering that's the highest percentage that I have in my DNA. Following that, I have 4% from indigenous Puerto Rico, which is actually kind of interesting. I don't claim to be an indigenous person at all. I just think that 4%, I just want to know who those people are, who they were. I want to learn more about them and the Taino people who live in Puerto Rico as well. I think that's a beautiful heritage. I don't claim any of that. Don't get me, that's not me saying I claim this, I'm indigenous. That's not, I obviously am not. But it was cool, and it's I wish I could just talk to those people. I wish I could know who they were and how they, came to be me. And then I'm not gonna list the rest. It's 1%, all of the rest of it. So actually, I think that, going through this, it was really interesting. I, again, was not shocked. It was cool to know that I was 23% European Jewish. I don't work with Lilith or anything. I don't really feel that I count, because I've never been to synagogue, and we did Hanukkah once, we did Passover once. It was not really a big religious thing in my family, though by blood, it's kind of neat. Okay, so as I kind of mentioned, like I do have ancestors in my past who obviously most likely, I guess, did some pretty terrible things. Like there were some ancestors that I have, I'm sure, who were terrible people. We all have people like that in our family. So another question I get a lot when people are talking about ancestor work, and of course my answer is like, I don't really do this, so like here's what my opinion is, because I'll always be straight up with you. But even if you have ancestors who aren't good people, because again, there's no way a family was just like good people all the way through. Like there has to be one like bad apple, you know what I mean? It doesn't mean you can't do ancestor work. It may just mean that like you just don't like honor or venerate those people that you know were bad. Like they may have like owned slaves or colonized or like anything like that. Like it could just be that you don't work with those people or those ancestors. On the other hand, ancestor work is all about seeking guidance from people, like from people who have passed on, and support from them, and in return, you honor them and remember them. So that's like really the core of ancestor work. Some ways you can do this. Number one is learn about them. Learn your family tree, learn your family history. I think that listening to stories from my grandmother about like my great-grandfather, because obviously she like remembers all of that, is like really interesting. So I've always been interested in that. Both of my grandparents on my mom's side are very much like interested in like ancestry.com. They have like linked up with all these like cousins that I just like didn't know I had, and it's like very interesting. And it's cool to see like how we all kind of look alike. Like it's fascinating. Like genealogy is really, really neat. And they've been into it since since Ancestry like existed. Like when they first found out about it, they're like, yes. So, they like do that kind of stuff. My partner's grandmother also does that. Like she has, oh my gosh, she was so funny. She was like, oh, I went to the cemetery and did grave rubbings. And I'm like, man, I like this lady. Like she's cool. So that's like, it's like an interesting topic. And these days it's so accessible that like, I really encourage you guys to do it if you can. Or at least, like, when I say do it if you can, like, I mean, like, get your ancestry, like, DNA done, or, like, 23andMe or whatever. Another great way to practice ancestry work is or ancestor work, I should say, is to just talk to your family. I know that this might be hard for people who are adopted, so I do want to be sensitive to that. Like, if you are unsure of where your birth parents are, maybe going the ancestry route, maybe going the DNA test route might be a little bit, like, more, like, relevant to you if you're just like, I don't know. And I don't want to be like sound judgmental, and I do want to like take that into account. So there are definitely a bunch of ways of approaching this. Some things that you can do, you can learn stories about them, what they liked, those things to like add to your ancestor altar. Like let's say your great-grandfather was known for having like a wooden pipe, like, like one of those old-timey ones. Maybe finding a pipe and leaving him an offering of tobacco would be like a nice way to connect with him a little bit. For me, one of the ancestors that I do want to venerate is my great-grandfather, who really loved The Wizard of Oz. I also have like a collection of letters that he and I wrote back and forth to each other. So I do plan on like finding them at some point because they're in a storage unit somewhere like at my mom's place. And like having those in a specific like box that I have. So he also wrote a book about his life. He was a very interesting man. He wrote a book about his life and his wife's life, and it was just it's so nice. It's such a good book. It like makes me cry every time I read it. It's just so good. And I just it's something that I cherish. So that's something that I would put into an ancestor altar. Ancestors are definitely a lot more easily accessible, I think, than a lot of deities, and easier to work with, considering that they are close with you at all times. Like anyone who has passed on that you were close with and that you loved, of course, is always with you. I want to make sure everybody knows that. They're always a lot like watching out for you. I know that seems like kind of a cliche or like, whatever thing to say, but it's true. Someone who works with a lot of like death deities, like it's just confirmed for me, and like it's something that I know to be true. So hopefully that gives you guys some comfort, especially if you've lost loved ones in the last year or so, like, which my heart goes out to you. That's just be aware and just know that they're there for you. I also wanted to touch on, like, especially if you don't feel as connected to my family, like for me, I had an abusive like member of my family, so it's hard for me to connect with those ancestral roots. So for a while I was like, I'm considering, and still kind of am, because I'm not like super deep into ancestor work, though I do tend to do like more remembrance work during like Samhain time, like around now. So it's working with the ancestors of witches and pagans who may not be blood related to you, but who came before you, and honoring those people who, and giving like thanks for them to have, carry on their religion, carry on their beliefs, teach the next generation, and allow us to therefore practice what we practice now, modern witchcraft. So yeah, I found that concept in a book actually, and I just thought it was really beautiful, especially for someone who, like me, doesn't necessarily feel as like connected to their family, I should say, and just like having that kind of community, that sense of community, like the spirits of witches who came before us are still there to support us in our current craft. So I really like that, and I think that's a really powerful thing. Some witches do set up ancestor altars. That is not necessary, but you know, if you have like pictures of them, if you kind of like, I do plan on setting up an ancestor altar somewhere in my house. I'm not 100% sure yet, but it is a nice way to have a specific space for them in your practice. And of course, not all witches can have altars up all the time. You know, you might have certain things. So maybe a digital place where you have like a picture of them and like a little like, you know, like about me and like why you know, like what you remember about them and stuff like that, because it's easy to like do things digitally these days, and I think that's really nice. It doesn't have to be public. It can just be for you, like a Google document or something like that. But you know, ancestor altars are like kind of the main way I see people working with them. They also do call ancestors in during their workings, similar to how you would call in a deity, I assume. However, because I don't necessarily work with deities, or excuse me, I don't work with ancestors as much as I do deities, it's hard for me to say one way or another, and everyone's practice is different. So it's kind of up to them. I recommend like reaching out to witches who like actively work with ancestors if you would like more information, yes. And the number one way that people do work with their ancestors is through tarot, pendulum work, or dream work. So asking them for dreams, meeting them on the astral plane, speaking to them through pendulum readings, which is like yes, no answers, or perhaps going through tarot, like reading through tarot, similar to how you would work with a deity. So that is my little intro to ancestor work. Again, we are going to be talking a lot more about it later this month, just because that is such a huge theme to Samhain, and it's very interesting. So I'm excited to do a deeper dive into it, definitely. So in the description down below, I have linked a little like article that goes a little bit more in depth into ancestor work. It is from thethreadsofate.com. They have their own tarot decks and I believe a couple like books and stuff. And like workbooks and journals and stuff. So I do really recommend you checking them out. It is a great resource. I found it very informative. They made it really approachable and great. So definitely check that out, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.